Hi, it is Friday, May 24th, 2019, and this is the Pro and Con Show. I'm your host, Michael James Ott. Welcome to the show. Um, Again, just brief introduction on every show. Don't know how many of you are watching every day or reviewing this on a regular basis. Hopefully in the future will be many. So I apologize about a little bit of redundancy, but the intent of the show is to just spend 15 or 20 minutes looking through the news in a way that's unbiased by political or religious views. And in order to do that, what I'm doing is encouraging you very strongly, all of you, every single citizen out there, to spend a little bit of extra time looking for information across various news sources as opposed to just looking at one. A lot of us get into a habit. That's the right word. Or it's a habit to we prefer a certain source of information. Maybe they mostly agree with us, or maybe we just like the correspondents that are mostly providing the news or whatever the case may be. That has a tendency to lead to ignorance on our parts because whatever that source is making some choices around what the information they're going to provide and also how it's provided. And we want to focus on just the facts. So who, what, where, when, right? We want to understand what is happening and then make our own decisions about what the implications are of that. So I go through websites, and so on the rightmost is Breitbart, and then we've got Fox News, and then in the center is NPR, National Public Radio, has a website. They publish a bunch of stories on there, mostly unbiased for the most part, it appears. And then a little bit left of that is CNN, and then further left of that is the Huffington Post. And I've been looking at these five websites, and you pick any five that you like, hopefully with some balance. I specifically look at these because they're fairly well known. If you read various articles about bias in the news or information that's out there, there's some consensus views on this that some of this bias is in these websites. So it's Friday, May 24th, as I said, 2019, and there's not a lot of news today actually about the fight between Mr. Trump and Congress over information around Russian influence on the election and Mr. Trump's finances, and whether he's the emollients clause, whether he's violating the emollients clause of the Constitution, which is the purpose behind that, looking into his finances. So the Huffington Post has a big picture, and it says the Trumpification of the IRS, and so they're concerned about Mr. Mnuchin being overly influencing the IRS. There's also a story that internal to the IRS, there was a memo basically saying that the interpretation of the laws, the existing laws within the IRS, said that Congress should be able to get any tax records that they want. If they just ask for them, they should be able to get them. But this was an internal memo, and it's of course been leaked to the news. And Mr. Mnuchin is the head of that department, is saying no, that's not official department policy, and so on. So I want to hit on a couple of things today. So one of the things is the Middle East and also healthcare. So one of the things on the Huffington Post here is Trump skirts Congress and is arming the Saudi government some more. So supposedly there's resistance in Congress to providing more arms to the Saudis. and Mr. Trump feels like they should get more. And I guess there's a clause in one of the regulations, the Weapons Export Act or something like that, that allows the administration to declare an emergency again. So again, there's a lot of discussion about emergency powers and what is or is not emergency powers. And so it would seem like we're going to have at some point some kind of consistent, nonpartisan way to evaluate when an administration declares that there's an emergency, because it would seem like that's wildly open to interpretation, and there seems to be no good way to mitigate that if the executive branch wants to go forward with that. So I wanted to mention that, and then also Middle East. What else was there on Middle East? Oh yes, and so on the National Public Radio, Mr. Trump, the Trump administration is ordering another 1,500 troops into the Middle East. They're not saying where they're going. They're just saying that they're needed to support various operations, but they will not be headed to Iraq or Syria. Yeah, so it's unclear what's going on there. Of course, there's tensions are rising between Iran and the United States because we've backed out of the Iran deal, and there's a bunch of sanctions in place, and the Iranians are trying to get, economically trying to get some relief because they're really suffering. So their lever is, well, we'll start making nuclear weapons again, and of course the administration's position is that they're already working on it anyway. So that's the Middle East, and then let me touch on healthcare, because on National Public Radio it says there's a story here. It says the state of Colorado is capping insulin copays at $100 a month. And the reason why they're doing that is that the price of insulin, which was actually a relatively inexpensive prescription drug, a couple of decades ago, the cost of it has skyrocketed, and it for sure has to do with the greed of some pharmaceutical companies. And so the state of Colorado is saying, well, there's a high percentage of diabetic patients or patients that suffer from diabetes that they need insulin, and the cost is getting outrageous. So that's it. We're going to cap it $100 a month and force the insurance companies to negotiate and make up the rest. And so so whether we're talking about the Middle East, or we're talking about healthcare, or we're talking about racism, or we're talking about balancing the budget, or whatever, or peace in the Middle East. But let's go back to just focus on the two topics of the Middle East and healthcare. So one of the things that our government is abysmal at doing is stepping back and periodically taking one of these issues and staying with it long enough and in a sufficiently large way, a holistic view, to really educate not only themselves, the administration and Congress, but also the American people about this issue. And then, and so what happens is that people just, either an administrator or some representative or senator, they offer some kind of policy or law or whatever, and it's just rifle shots. And it's looking at maybe potentially correcting, like this thing with insulin. The law says caps it at this, and also they're supposed to investigate why the cost of insulin are going way up. But it's really that particular issue in healthcare is just a one symptom of all of a much bigger issue, which is there's this excessive increase in healthcare, and there's a handful of causes probably in there, yet no one fully understands them, and no one is taking the time to understand them as far as the administration or Congress, nor are they helping the American people in general understand that. So the whole point behind everything that I'm saying right now is I would suggest, and I would strongly support, that every month there is an issue of the month. So there's all kinds of things that are going on a regular basis, and Kim Jong-un says this or whatever, and okay, that's going to be an ongoing thread of miscellaneous stuff that comes up. But there's two things that we ought to be doing every month on top of or in despite of all of that noise that's out there, the chaos. And that is, we should be taking one of these fundamental issues that we talk about on a regular basis, let's say it's healthcare, and we should spend 3 or 4 days really looking at this issue as a nation, from the administration perspective, from the halls of Congress perspective, from industry experts, and from the American people's perspective. We should spend a few days talking about the whole healthcare issue, and really dive into, over a few days period, what is causing the various costs to increase, and get into and pull back the kimono, if you will, and expose what's going on and why the things are the way that they are, and kind of in a major investigative effort, and then that can be summarized fairly well, and then that can be used for, okay, the pro and the con, the good and the bad, the for and against. Here's what's going on now. What kind of policies would make sense based on this information? But we'd be fully informed. And right now we're not even close. And the same thing for the Middle East. There's lots of moving parts, of course, and they change on a regular basis. And instead of having the president say, oh, the Saudis need more weapons, and having Congress or the majority of Congress say, no, they don't, okay, let's step back, next month and talk about Middle East peace and the various players in the Middle East, and what's the latest going on with them, and some of the history, and how we got where we are, and again, spend a few days and then summarize that information, and then talk about, okay, what is a policy going forward that's going to make sense. And the other thing that we should be doing every month is looking, what is our long-term vision? We're our country's 200 or 300 years old-ish, 250 years old, depending on what date you say we start with. And humanity's been around for centuries, and but the question is, where are we headed? We're sentient beings, and we have the ability to look into history and to also try to look forward. And the question is, what do we want to be? What should we be trying to do? What are goals for America, or for humanity in general, 100 years from now, and 1,000 years from now? And maybe it doesn't make any sense to go any further than that, but maybe someday it would. Maybe someday we'll be sophisticated enough that we'll be able to say, well, maybe what should we think about for the next 100 years? What should we thinking about for 1,000 years from now, and maybe 20,000 or 100,000 years from now? Well, we don't do any of that at the moment, and to me it's insane that we don't do these things. So I'm a strong proponent of thinking these things through more holistically, and getting people on the same page, and then deciding based on the amalgam of the information, what should we do? What tweaks to the policy and law do we need? Or maybe there's a breakthrough and we decide to do some kind of wholesale change. But the fact is, the reality is, after 200 or 300 years of governing and having a government, it's perfectly okay to have most of the changes be pretty slow. And in fact, that would seem to make sense, right? And but we still should know where we're going, and we should get up to speed before we make changes. Because otherwise we'll inevitably enact policy that just causes more errors and more problems and more things to fix in the future. All right, so we spoke a little bit about the Middle East and healthcare, and we looked at the 5 different websites a little bit tonight. And there is one other story that's. I live in Hudson, Wisconsin, and not too far from here, actually, a Wisconsin man kidnapped this young girl after killing, basically breaking into their home and killing the parents with guns, and then took the girl, and she was missing for a handful of months. She finally escaped, and he was recently, actually today, I think, sentenced to 2 life terms plus 25 years for the kidnapping. And it's just nothing for me to say other than a horrific crime, of course. And this individual obviously has some kind of significant impairment to his moral values. So I read some of these stories, and once he was caught, and he assumed he would be caught, it was always his intent, he says, and he did this, to immediately confess and to minimize the time of the trial and so on. And he did that kind of stuff, and he said that he feels really bad about what happened to the victim here, this girl that he kidnapped, and the pain and suffering that he caused her. So very, very strange, some kind of strange thing there that caused him to, because if the story is to believe it, and it seems to be true, he basically saw her getting on a bus in front of her house and decided that he had to have her, had to own her, basically, and then plotted to, kill the parents and take her, and then actually executed on that plan. It's a horrible, horrific kind of criminal kind of activity, and I hope someday we'll be sophisticated enough, if we keep working on things again, taking the time to understand them better. I hope someday we're sophisticated enough where we can understand why individuals do that and the makeup of them, and then screen them and hopefully prevent them from doing these crimes, through prevention of gun ownership, or medical assistance in some form or some combination thereof, or other things too. I don't know what all the actions would be, but anyway. All right, so we're out of time. It's Friday, May 24th, 2019. This has been the Pro and Con Show. I'm your host, Michael James Ott. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to talking again tomorrow. Bye for now.